More than 100 years have passed since Rainier was born in the princely palace of Monaco in Monte Carlo. That May 31st, 1923, marked the birth of the second child of Charlotte of Monaco and Prince Pierre, Count of Polignac. Over the years, along with Grace Kelly, he formed one of the most glamorous families in the European royal scene, although his relationships with his children were not always smooth. The current Prince Albert of Monaco was always close to his father, Prince Rainier. But after his death on April 6, 2005, Albert tried to leave his mark by modernizing the politics and economy of the principality, which was often mentioned in society pages but seemed stuck in the 1960s. Rainier's three children, Albert, Caroline, and Stephanie, have always demonstrated their unity, especially in recent years, and a deep respect for their parents. But the reality is that all three faced complicated relationships, particularly with Rainier. These relationships at times turned into conflicts, especially between the prince and his heir. From the pressure on Albert to the lonely childhood of the three siblings, Rainier involved Albert in the political and economic life of the principality from a very young age. But Albert, being a kind and conscientious person in his duties, could not help but feel enormous pressure, especially when he thought about his parents' story, which occupied front pages for decades. The heir was expected to live up to high expectations, and that was not always easy. In fact, Albert's delay in marrying and starting a family, which was questioned from the very beginning, may have a lot to do with this pressure. Rainier made his son feel this responsibility from the start. Albert had to be perfect, explains French historian Philippe Delorme. This led to the relationship between father and son not always being good. Rainier was always dissatisfied Albert never did enough. However, illness brought father and son closer together. Albert understood that his time was coming in the history of the principality. Father and son had to learn to work together. Rainier underwent heart surgery in 1994, and in his final years, their conversations grew longer. In 2001, he faced lung cancer. It was then that he began to delegate authority to Albert, who represented him, especially on foreign trips. But the demands did not lessen. Caroline, the eldest daughter, and Stephanie also felt this pressure, although in their own way, as they were not going to take the throne. But that's how they were raised, just like their brother. Caroline admitted several years ago in the book Albert, The Prince and the Man, published on the prince's 60th birthday, that all three siblings had a lonely childhood. Evidence of this is that they only began dining at the same table with their parents from the age of 14. Until then, they spent practically all their time with their British nanny. There was a lot of talk about how modern our upbringing was, but the reality is that we were isolated from the world. Caroline explained. We dined in the nursery with our nanny, Maureen King. This created a close bond between the siblings. The bond between Albert and Caroline was particularly strong. All three were closer to their nanny than to their parents. Rainier never understood that his children needed other children. And later, as they grew older, he watched with surprise and a sense of failure as they rebelled and did not follow his directives. Why Stephanie of Monaco was her father Prince Rainier's favorite. Stephanie also grew up in the spotlight, despite the fact that it was always said she was the favorite of both Grace and Rainier. The tragedy of her mother's death in September 1982 increased this pressure to unbearable levels for the young princess. But her father was going through his own grief and did not have the strength to pay attention to his youngest daughter. The result was a life full of ups and downs between Monaco, Paris, and Los Angeles. In concluding this story about the princely family of Monaco, it is impossible not to reflect on the complexity and depth of each family member's fate, the external glamour and brilliance that millions admired concealed internal conflicts, family dramas, and difficult relationships. The story of Prince Rainier and his children reminds us that even those born into wealth and fame are not immune to the trials that each of us faces. The pressure of responsibility, feelings of loneliness, and the struggle to find one's place in the world, these are themes that resonate with many. Ultimately, despite the challenges and disagreements, family remains the most important value, and the love and support that the siblings have managed to maintain for each other are true proof of the strength of familial bonds. These stories, filled with ups and downs, show us that real life is not just about luxury and high society events, but also about the daily struggle for happiness and understanding